Hello.
Hello.
Sorry about that. My Discord was updating.
Oh yeah, no problem. How have you been?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, good to hear it. Okay, so we have been on a moral philosophy arc lately. We've been doing some lectures on the topic, but they seem to be roughly like community college level lectures. And the next one that we've got today is about moral dilemmas. So I don't know. You got anything you
My
want?
favorite
It's
debate
probably my
tactic. I
favorite too.
cannot wait. Yeah, let me just get this pulled up here. Oh my gosh. Why? Oh my gosh, the default volume of everything is so high. Although I actually prefer that, because there's nothing more infuriating than when you set something to max volume and it's still too quiet.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Okay, the volume is pretty good.
While disagreement about ethics is widespread, there is one claim about ethics that should be relatively uncontroversial. Ethics is challenging. Now, there are a variety of reasons why it is
Speak for
challenging,
yourself,
but
Professor.
ultimately, I think ethics is
Yeah, I
challenging
Got all
solved
because
it
it
the
last week.
answers.
challenges us as persons. Being an ethical person can test your will to do the right thing and even your ability to know what the right thing is. Ethics challenges us because life is complex. Our perspective is limited, and human nature is replete with weaknesses and frailties that we constantly need to work to overcome. This is why there's so many difficult ethical situations that can leave us thinking, I can't decide what should be done, or, if I were in that situation, I don't think I could muster enough strength to do the right thing. In this video, I'm going to explore this issue of why ethics is challenging, why it's difficult, why it challenges us as persons, by looking at the difference between moral and ethical dilemmas. And the goal of the video is going to be to understand how these moral and ethical dilemmas arise and how we can better respond to them. To begin, we should start by offering a provisional definition of the difference between a moral dilemma and an ethical dilemma. The author of our textbook, Lisa Newton, describes a moral dilemma or a moral problem in the following way. She says, in a moral problem, we know what is right, but we may have very good reasons not to want to do it. Or we may be puzzled about the right way to say no, or the best means to obtain the best outcome. Additionally, we may be tempted to preserve our level of comfort by doing nothing at all. Now, what is the point she is making here about a moral dilemma? When you are facing a moral dilemma, you're facing a specific kind of challenge to your character. The challenge isn't primarily about knowledge, right? In a moral dilemma, the challenge isn't primarily knowing what the right thing to do is. If you are honest with yourself, and it may be difficult to be honest with yourself in this situation, but if you're honest with yourself, then the idea is you know what the morally correct thing to do is. The issue you're having and the challenge you're facing is that you are having a very difficult time making yourself do it or finding a way to do what you know is the best moral option to proceed with. And as an example, she gives the previously discussed case that we talked about of the impaired driver case. So recall the impaired driver case. Here we have someone who causes an accident in a parking garage, and they're deciding, do I call the cops and go through the accepted procedures, or do I simply leave the scene of the accident? And after weighing up all the various factors, at least the evaluation that Newton comes to is that you know deep down that the right thing to do is to call the police, own up, and take responsibility for what you have done. Of course, you know that doing this will cause you a lot of personal hardship
I
to
didn't think
your
it was as
career,
straightforward as
to your
that.
family, and potentially lead to
Just
fines or jail
because of the
time.
thing with the family
So the
depending on you
issue
or whatever.
here in the
It's like,
Yeah.
impaired driver case isn't so much what is the right thing to do, but the issue is, do you have the strength of character? Do you have the strength of will to, in fact, do what you already know is correct? That is fundamentally what characterizes a moral dilemma. And as Newton suggests here, one of the main obstacles in the way of acting in the correct manner when it is difficult to do so is temptation. In the impaired driver case, we are tempted to think about ourselves. We are tempted to do what is unjust to avoid the difficult consequences that we would face if we, in fact, took responsibility for our actions. So, in a moral dilemma, we're talking about a case where you know what is right, but you're simply tempted to do the wrong thing, and you're having a difficult time following through on what you know would be virtuous. Now, let's contrast this with an ethical dilemma. In an ethical dilemma, the challenge you are facing is somewhat different. Now, an ethical dilemma could also be a moral dilemma, right? If we have an ethical dilemma, it might be the case that even if you knew what the right thing to do is, that it would also be difficult for you to actually make yourself do it. Again, because of the negative repercussions or the sacrifices that you might have to make. But primarily, what characterizes an ethical dilemma is knowledge. Specifically, what makes an ethical dilemma difficult is that you may not even know what the right thing to do is. And the reason you may not
Yeah.
know what the right thing to do
Isn't
is
that
isn't
all
because you don't know
dilemmas?
all the facts of the case. It's not because you're uneducated from a moral point of view. It's not because you can't reason correctly. We can imagine someone who's an excellent reasoner, who studied ethics, who knows everything there is to know about the case, and who's thought very
can we pause
carefully
for a
about the
second?
situation.
So I think in some sense you could say that's all dilemmas, but I think the distinction they're drawing here is like um, one of them is like you have a belief that something is moral, and then the dilemma is whether or not your choice aligns with your moral belief. And then in the other case, it's a decision that's going to lead you to a moral belief. I think.
Yeah,
Right?
I think the second part he said there, I think, is the key. The reason it's a dilemma isn't because you don't have all the facts or you don't have the ability to do it. It's because you're not sure what to do. Specifically, there is a problem in trying to resolve the logic of like the moral dilemma,
Yeah.
which is distinct from a dilemma where it's like, oh, are we going to be able to get are we going to be able to get enough food to these people? Like it's like there's something different from like just sort of a logistical question as opposed to like almost a puzzle of a moral system. Like how do you actually fit together these two conflicting ideas you have?
Yeah, when somebody says the phrase moral dilemma, the second one, which he calls an ethical dilemma, is usually what comes to mind. Like usually I don't
Yeah,
hear
morals,
moral.
ethics, like that's one of the it's like you just throw those all mean the same goddamn thing. Like when it comes to using them in common conversation, like that's like similar to like depersonalization versus deactualization and stuff like this. Like these are terms that I feel like are just used so interchangeably. It's not even worth trying to be like, no, guys, when I say it like that, that's just one of those things where you just say what you mean instead of using the term.
Most of the time, yes. Although since we're specifically going into a lecture about these things, it may be worth distinguishing between them
Mm.
for now, for the sake of this conversation.
And could still be left at the end of the day saying to themselves, I'm really lost and still indecisive about what should be done here. This person might say, I could see both sides of the issue, both choices presented seem to have strong points in their favor, and no matter what I do, I'm going to have to sacrifice something. There is no perfect option. It is that inability to come to a decision, to know what the morally right thing to do is, that is primarily what characterizes an ethical dilemma as opposed to a moral one. In order to gain a better understanding of what an ethical dilemma is, we're going to again turn to one of the cases that is discussed in our textbook, and this is the Vlasovit case. So I'm going to read through this and then make a few comments on it. Okay, so Peter and Dora Vlasovic, 51 years and 43 years of age respectively, are at a loss as to what to do about Dora's 67-year-old mother, who lives with them. She's suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and while her periods of confusion are not yet continual, she's becoming too unreliable to be left alone. Both husband and wife work outside the house and cannot stay with mother during the day. They started looking into appropriate nursing homes, but mother, who is a school teacher and fiercely independent all her life, has put her foot down. No homes. Look, you know how valuable my mind and my dignity have been to me, she finally said to them. I simply cannot endure the thought of ending my days tied in a chair, drooling on my lap. See that pillow on my bed? When I can't function anymore, my life is over as far as I'm concerned, and I want you to just put that pillow over my face and sit on it for about 20 minutes. Just call the doctor in the morning and say I died in my sleep. I won't contradict you. No homes. Meanwhile, the couple has found out that the cost of these homes is well beyond their means and that mother will be left on Medicaid after her assets are gone. Their own assets are not large, and they would be totally responsible for the costs if they hire nurses to come to the house to take care of her. They also have teenage children approaching college to think about, who will need money for college and probably financial help as young adults after their education is finished. How did people used to handle this type of situation before there were nursing homes? Dora had once asked her doctor. Easy, he had replied. People didn't used to live this long, and when they
Important point of clarification. There's a lot of discourse online. This doesn't fucking matter. I don't know why I'm derailing us here, but I'm going to do it anyways. Okay, I'll make it quick. There's a lot of people who would see something like this and say, oh, actually, it's very inaccurate to say that people didn't live this long because lifespan has actually been relatively consistent and its life expectancy has gone up. But that's mostly just taken into account, or that rather is mostly taken into account by just looking at people who would have died in childbirth and or would have died in like the first couple years of their life. And that is actually a bit of an overcorrection. It is actually true that there has been some pretty significant gains in lifespan over the past century or so. Just an important point to clarify there, because there's a lot of people that see like one takedown. There's a lot of people who act like there's a common belief that 100 years ago people were dropping dead in their 30s, which isn't true. But then there was a bit of an overcorrection to say, oh no, there really had lifespan has been consistent throughout human history, and that isn't true. We have made significant gains in how long you can live a later life, but it's not the case that people would never live to their 60s or 70s previously.
Yeah, and as far as I know, like, I mean, okay, so the childbirth thing, like you said, it is big, and infant mortality reducing is big, but then
That's
also
most of it, no doubt.
yeah, yeah. And then also we have big reductions in the rate at which people die of infectious diseases. That's another huge one, and
Yep.
we have lower rates of violence and starvation. Those are like small contributors, but it's something. And then we have much better medical care, for ailing people who are aging, which adds, I think, pretty significantly to it as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
did in this state with no other choice in the matter, people simply left them home alone, tied down or roaming wherever they wanted to roam. That did sound easy to Dora, but on balance, worse than the other alternatives. They have the house to think of too, and leaving mother alone all day sounds like playing Russian roulette with house and mother both. But their first concern is for
With the
mother. The
house?
life
They think she's gonna
projected
burn
for
it
her
down?
doesn't really seem to be worth living the more they think about it. Putting a pillow over her face is a dreadful thought, of course, but it is what mother wants. If they can't find a pillow,
Jesus!
the Hemlock Society advertises many more humane ways to bring life to an end. Should they go the pillow route? Should they explore the rational suicide alternatives with mother? Or should they insist on the home or put her there anyway after she is no longer organized enough to resist? Or should they devastate their own financial resources with hired nurses? Are there other alternatives? The reason I bring this case up here is because it provides an excellent example of an ethical dilemma. And the reason it provides an excellent example of an ethical dilemma is, as we're going to see, there are many conflicts of values. There are many fundamental moral and ethical values that almost anyone would think are important and are worth upholding, but that come into conflict with one another. And because they come into conflict with one another, No matter what we choose, we're going to have to sacrifice something of importance. In order to demonstrate this to you, I'm going to identify four different types of ethical conflict, four different conflicts of values in this case, and discuss them separately. The first one is the following. There's the question of what constitutes a life worth living. Is it merely the quantity of one's life, how much life they have, or more fundamentally, is it the quality of our life that makes our life worth living? It's an important question to answer when we start to think about what is the value of mother's life to her at this point going and also going into the future. Second, we're going to see that there is a conflict in this case between the values of promoting welfare, doing what is best for everyone involved, and respecting the autonomous choice of mother. In addition, we're going to see that when it comes to respecting autonomous choice, there is also a conflict between that and upholding certain inviolable or very important traditional moral prohibitions in society. Specifically, perhaps the traditional prohibition on voluntary homicide. How do we both respect mother's wishes and respect her autonomy while also not running afoul of the law and not running afoul of any very important, extremely fundamental, absolute moral rules? And finally, there's a fourth conflict to consider as well. How do we sort out the different familial duties that the Vlasovics have in this case? How do we weigh the duties that they have to mother, the duties they have to a parent, versus the duties that they have to their own children? Must a sacrifice be made here? These are the four different conflicts of values that I will look at in this video pertaining to this case.
I'm gonna overthrow the government and put mom in charge. That way
There you
she
go.
can change the law and get rid of that conflict, and it'll keep her busy.
One reason that cases like this are so difficult is that they really force us to think about some deep and difficult philosophical questions. They really force us to think about what is life all about? What is life for? What makes life valuable? And we can see this in the following passage from the case. So Newton describes the Vlasovics reflecting in the following manner. Their first concern is for mother, but the life projected for her does not really seem to be worth living the more they think about it. Now, I think that's a very striking phrase. The phrase, a life worth living. Why is that such a striking phrase? Well, think about what it implies. The concept of a life worth living also implies the possibility of a life not worth living. It implies the possibility of an existence where continuing or further that existence would not be a benefit to the individual in question, but would actually be a harm. And if that is the case, then that means that merely knowing that someone is alive or will be alive isn't necessarily enough for us to conclude that their life is a good thing for them. Now, why does this matter in this particular case? Well, Mother herself has brought up the possibility of having her life ended through various different means. And some of those means will be important to us, and we'll discuss those later in the video. But here I just want to focus on the idea of that request itself. If we're bringing up the possibility that of Mother ending her life or having her life ended, then we really have to think about the question, what is it that makes a person's life worth living? How do we know whether someone's life is going well or whether someone's life is going poorly? How do we make a judgment about the value of a life? Well, what I would want to suggest is that there's really two different main considerations. On the one hand, we might have a consideration dealing with quantity. We might say that when judging the value of a life, we need to consider how long that life will last or has lasted. So, this is relatively commonsensical in a way. You might say, look, if we're looking at the whole span of someone's life and we're considering two individuals, both of whom had roughly the same level of enjoyment, the life that lasted longer would seem to be better, right? More of a good thing up to a certain point is better than less of a good thing. So there are quantity considerations here. But even in that example I gave, I also mentioned another consideration, and that is the consideration of the quality of a life. When we're judging the quality of a life, we won't just look at quantity or how much of it there is, but we'll also think about how good is each moment of that life, or how good are all the moments of that life taken together on average. Right? So, when judging the value of a life, we need to consider the quality of life it affords the individual in question. Now, of course, this is more difficult to measure, right? In terms of quantity of life, you just measure in terms.
So I'm just gonna pause there. I feel like he just sort of asserted something that a lot of people would fight him on. Because, man, that's whether or not the quality of a life should go to moral calculation. I think that's a real point of contention that a lot of people would disagree with. Um,
Yeah.
I guess to be fair, the word quality is doing a lot of work, which he acknowledges, right? Because a lot of people would certainly say, well, some things, that's not a life anymore, right? Like perhaps, right? Like, you might go, oh, well, what about someone who's in a coma and they're brain dead? A
Yeah.
lot of people say, well, that isn't a life by my view. When we use the word life, we're referring to sort of the conscious experience potentially. So to be fair, sort of acknowledging that, but man, yeah, like this is the kind of place where if you were having this discussion, you would get derailed for like an hour into like what is life in order to answer this kind of question.
Yeah, my intuition on how to answer this question is that you could think of it on like a scale from good to bad with some like neutral point in between, and then like I guess you just think about like, is the life on average good or on average bad, and if it's on average good, then more is better, and if it's on average bad, then it's not. I mean that, and I think like probably a lot of people think of it similarly, but there are going to be a bunch of assumptions baked into that could be contested. So yeah. So I think what they really got to do is, there's the utilitarian hospital where they like dismantle the people for parts and like save 10 people by, every time somebody goes there. I think they just got to take mom to that hospital and she can be a hero and save 10 people.
Days or months or years, seconds, right? Some unit of time that we've all agreed upon. When we're talking about the quality of someone's life or how valuable each moment is, that'll be more difficult because there are many different ways you can measure that. You can measure it in terms of happiness, pleasure. Are you getting your desires satisfied? Are you having opportunities for new and interesting experiences? Are you attaining moral virtue? Are you achieving your career and material successes that you're striving after? All of these could be valid and acceptable ways of measuring the value of a person's life. So I'm not going to get into the different philosophical debates about what is the best way to measure the quality of a life. I just want to point out here that both of these considerations seem relevant.
Yeah, I don't
And in
actually
fact,
know
if we
what
look
my serious
further
answer to
into,
this
for
dilemma
instance, a
is.
medical context, we can see that the conflicts and relationships between these two different ways of measuring the value of a life often come up. So, some researchers who were doing studies on cancer patients made the following broad statement about how these two considerations, the role that they play in the life of a cancer patient. The researchers say trade offs between quality of life and length of life are often necessary in decision making in oncology. It is acknowledged increasingly that in this process of weighing the benefits and side effects of treatment, the patient's perspective is of prime concern. So, the issue that the patients are thinking about is to what extent do they want to pursue treatment for their cancer, or at what point will it no longer be a benefit? And as they describe, we can see considerations of quantity and quality both playing a role. Some patients are willing to go to extreme lengths to prolong survival, accepting treatments that severely impair quality of life. Other patients feel that they want to make the most of their remaining years and are unwilling to risk an inferior quality of life.
Can we pause for a second?
So we can see that both considerations seem valid,
I,
both.
I'm saying a bunch of jokey stuff, like largely because this is like it's such an uncomfortable dilemma that they're presenting, and I don't actually know what my serious position on it is. But I mean, do you have an opinion on this? Like, either on the mother question or on the cancer treatment question?
I think that I'm gonna be honest. This would probably change a lot based off your personal feeling about the reasoning. But if someone says I would rather die than live in a nursing home, man, you're full of shit. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, like I'm sure there are some really bad nursing homes out there, but like, that's the kind of logic that makes me feel like we need to, take away your right of bodily autonomy. Because that seems like you're making an irrational decision. Like this is the kind of justification for suicide that makes me think you're not making a rational decision and you shouldn't be allowed to commit suicide.
Um, would they need to be making a rational decision to be allowed to commit?
I tend to think so. Yeah, I don't think I think I'm okay with superseding people's bodily autonomy if I don't think they're capable of making decisions. If they're not capable of making rational decisions.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of not really the point I'm contesting. It's more about like let me think, how do I put this? Well, like would you um because the way I was saying it before was like, would they need to be making a rational decision in order for them to do that, um, in order to be exempted from your overruling their bodily autonomy? So I guess what I'm suggesting is there might be some people who are making irrational decisions and yet you still wouldn't want to overrule their autonomy. Is that a thing? Or
I think I wouldn't want to overrule a decision unless it was really important. Like, I think you need a good reason to overrule someone's bodily autonomy. So if someone was like, if someone makes a dumb decision that doesn't matter, then I'm okay. But when it comes to someone ending their life, I do think that you have a much bigger, like the stakes are a lot higher. So I feel a lot more comfortable subjecting their reasoning to like scrutiny compared to just any action.
I think it makes sense to subject them to a lot of scrutiny, but I think you've also got a really hard enforcement problem. Like, if somebody really seriously wants to die, whether they're rational or not, it's actually going to be pretty hard to stop them.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a practicality when it comes to like implementing this kind of stuff more broadly. But I guess, but I think in this specific example, it seems like you probably have a little bit more say or ability to implement like like to overrule your grandma, I guess, in a scenario, or your mother.
Yeah, I mean, like my impulse when trying to give a serious answer to the problem with the aging mother is like, well, can't they do something to improve her life, like make it so that her time is more valuable and she's doing things that she cares about, so she'll no longer want to die. But I mean, obviously, I'm kind of skirting the entire dilemma if that works, right? I mean, I think the dilemma is
Yeah.
is premised on the idea that's not viable.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's like, okay, I guess the options are do as she says and secretly kill her. That's one of the options. And another one is send her to a nursing home against her wishes. Another one is just let her stay at home and don't send her to the nursing home. Save on some money, but you're risking her safety by doing that, so she'll be less safe than in a nursing home, but obviously more safe than if you kill her.
I think a more interesting, difficult question within this is the question of whether or not you're financially obligated, assuming you can't prevent her from, choosing to end her own life. If her only option is a nursing home, are you then morally obligated to, financially ruin yourself in order to then provide her the option that then she'll choose to not commit suicide of in-home nurses? I think that's a much more interesting question of like, okay, if we don't give grandma these nurses, she's going to die. Not because she needs them medically to survive, but because then, in order to survive, she'll be forced to go to a nursing home, and she will then choose to commit suicide. Do you bear any culpability in that chain of events? I think is really interesting.
Yeah, there's a similar thing that comes up with medical treatment, I think, all the time, right? It's like when people are facing what might be a terminal illness, it's like, and here we are in the United States where our healthcare is not free, and not everybody can afford a whole bunch of expensive medical treatments, and so at some point, like people sometimes have to make these choices, like, do we literally just let our family member die, or do we financially ruin the family so that maybe they can live another 2 years? I don't know. It's horrible that people are put in that position, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Seem acceptable, and different people will weigh these differently. The question we're faced with here is, how should we weigh these considerations in this case? Are they inevitably led into conflict? So the question we are faced with now is the following. What is more important when judging the value of our life? Is it the quantity of life we have, or is it the quality of life we have? And what makes a quality or valuable life? And I think an important example we can look to here to begin to answer this question is the example of the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. Now, why do I say he's a good person to look to in this instance? Because Socrates was someone who directly confronted the following question: is there anything worth dying for? Now, just a brief background to help us understand the points I want to make. Socrates is famous because he was ultimately put to death by the city of Athens. He was on trial in Athens for the crimes of inventing new gods and corrupting the youth. And ultimately, he was executed by the city. Now, what's interesting is that we have a record of the speech he gave at trial, and that record is in a dialogue written by his student Plato, which is called the Apology. And in that speech he makes to the trial, what he tells us is essentially that the jury has made him the following offer. The idea is that if he would stop practicing philosophy, if he would stop going around the city of Athens, bothering people and pestering people and forcing them to confront their own inadequacies and answer difficult philosophical questions, if he would stop all that, then they would let him live. But what we see from Socrates is complete and total defiance. He refuses to give up on his principles even when he knows that continuing to practice philosophy, not agreeing to cease his practice of philosophy, will actually lead to his death. And I just want to point to a few passages here where Socrates makes this point to the jury. So in one place he says, "You're not thinking straight, sir, if you think that a man who's any use at all should give any opposing weight to the risk of living or dying, instead of looking to this alone whenever he does anything, whether his actions are just or unjust, the deeds of a good or bad man." Here we see a concern that is very much about the quality of one's life. Right? He's saying it doesn't matter if I die or if I continue to live, if the only way I can continue to live is by being a vicious person who does bad things. For Socrates, having an upright and upstanding and virtuous moral character is more important to him than living a longer amount of time.
That's true. I think a lot of people would, or I should say that's true. I think a lot of people would probably say that there's some line where it's like, if the only way I can continue living is, by joining, the Third Reich or something, I choose death. That's a classic one. I
Yeah.
think the really interesting question is when you introduce, well, what if it's not your life, but it's someone else? The most classic example, I think, I don't know how familiar you are with Game of Thrones, but in the first book, Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, rather, I should say, very cultured. I don't watch that pathetic little show. No, but in the first book, and obviously the first season, when, spoiler alert for the very, very beginning of Game of Thrones, when Eddard Stark is imprisoned and Varys, on behalf of Cersei, is telling him, hey, you should lie about what you found and say that Joffrey is the true king, and they'll let you live. And Eddard Stark's like, it goes on this big long, I mean, it's an awesome speech. He says, you grew up around actors. I grew up around soldiers. I learned how to die a long time ago. It's an awesome line. But anyways, he does the classic thing, oh, I'd rather die, blah, 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 blah. And Varys is like, okay, if you do it, we won't kill your kids. And then Eddard is like, oh, shit, okay, that really complicates things. That really starts to put a twist on it. And I think the most interesting, because I think when you start analyzing it that way, it just becomes very simple. Well, okay, am I going to cause more moral harm by going along with whatever the immoral thing is that I'm preventing? You know, oh, join us, you know, either kill this person or we'll kill you. Well, I'd rather kill myself. Okay, we'll kill this person and we'll kill you and 10 other people. Okay, well, this is starting to seem like a pretty easy choice. I think what's most interesting about this question uniquely is that it feels like there is almost this, I'm struggling to find the right word. I'm going to go with lionization. There's almost this lionization of self-sacrifice that makes you feel a little disconnected from, like, I think, like, the moral weight of it. Where it's almost like, I don't want to fully say that you're just, you know, jerking yourself off about how moral you are, because you're choosing to die. So it's not like, you know, you are walking the walk. But it almost feels like the idea of dying for a cause. I mean, that's a very, like, archetypal, like, you know, moral goodness. And I wonder how much of that sort of fetishization is too strong of a word, but that kind of feeling of this is an ideal, the idealization of that warps your actual calculation of the moral harm.
It
right?
must.
Yeah, because
like when you think about, like, the 9/11 attackers, for example, they wanted to be martyrs dying for a cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it almost makes you wonder, well, okay, what if join us or we'll kill you. They're saying take the negative moral action of joining us to prevent the even more negative moral action of one person dying. But I wonder if you took people and if you took a person, you could do this one after the other because, humans are deeply self-rationalizing creatures. But, like, let's imagine you take a person and in one world you offer them that deal, we'll kill you. And in another world, they offer you the deal, we'll kill another person. I wonder how much difference there would be there, because there really isn't that much of a difference. I guess, to be fair, you could say that, you're choosing to die, and in a way that's more moral because, right, because you're not consenting to it, but you're consenting to it more, I suppose, than the person that's totally unrelated. But I think that's not a very compelling argument. And I think that for people that even wouldn't believe that, there would still potentially be a discrepancy. People would say, my life is just as valuable as the person's life who's being killed, but you play those two worlds out, I wonder if there would be a discrepancy. My feeling is that there would be, yes. But, I mean, that's a really difficult thing to actually know or to be able to confidently say. And I think it gets to one of the most interesting parts, I think, of moral philosophy and these sorts of moral questions, which is the belief that engaging with certain trains of thought is going to actually affect your view on the moral worth of certain actions. It's actually going to affect your calculus. It's one thing to say, I believe that killing one person to save 10 is moral. But I think that if you start to engage with that idea, killing one person to save 10 is moral, you'll actually start to upgrade the moral goodness of the actions you're doing and downgrade the moral badness of the things you're doing. So because most, and this is especially important because in the real world, you aren't presented with exact terms.
Right.
You're presented with things that are very that are very fungible in terms of exactly how morally bad is it. We don't have a good unit, and it'll be predictions and stuff. So the actual fact of the matter might be, you are going to end up killing 10 people, and then the belief is, I'm going to kill somewhere around 10. If you're the kind of person, or I'm going to kill 10 to save 100. if you start constantly thinking, oh, do the ends do justify the means, I do think, killing 10 to save 100 is morally justified, then you could look at the same scenario and no longer think you're killing 10 to save 100, but that you're killing 8 to save 110. And I think that's really, really interesting, because it starts to beg questions of not just, moral calculus, but how do you keep your own perspective grounded when you're exploring these ideas? Because I think they can have a potential to have a real effect on you. And I think that's like a really interesting sort of meta level to a lot of these moral questions when it comes to actually applying them in the real world, because you start to really lose control over them. Because it's not even, oh, I'm going to believe this. No. This isn't just going to happen to you, and you need to be guarded against it. The people that you convince are going to start having this happen to them, and you're not going to be in their head. You're not going to be talking to all of them. So when you put that out into ether, you lose control of it. How is that going to reliably play out?
This is like a really interesting point that you're making about the entire idea of having moral rules and principles, because our brains do so much pattern recognition that if you think of everything in terms of like a specific finite list of moral rules and principles, then every time you come across a moral decision, your brain is gonna like try to make it fit one of those choices that like if I feel like there's 10 different moral choices that I have figured out in the back of my mind that I'm confident I know the answer to, and then I come across something that doesn't quite fit one of those 10 situations, but my brain's gonna like try to make it fit, right? So like just the very idea of even having those type of like rules and guidelines, I think can diminish our ability to appreciate the nuance of individual situations that we're in.
Yep. It's so, and man, I feel like these are the really interesting places to sort of engage with these. I feel like so often, well, I was gonna say so often with moral conversations, we end up having the dumb conversation instead of the interesting one. But that's just true of everything these days. I mean, that's not unique to morality. That's just true of everything.
Well, you know what? This is our show. We can do it however we want. If you're interested in a specific angle on this, go, have at it.
Yeah, well, I think we already are having it. That's all I meant to say. There is. I wish that these conversations came up more when it comes to like debate panels or just conversations in general.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think we're like a few different meta levels deep on this. On like the question of, we're past the question of what to do with the aging mom, and now we're like on, like, is it even good to have moral rules or like what are the costs and benefits of even just having a moral system to begin with? I don't know.
And another very famous passage, he says, but again, if I say it's the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day, and the other things you've heard me discussing and examining myself and others about, on the grounds that the unexamined life isn't worth living for a human being, you'll believe me even less when I say that.
Oh, actually, can we pause?
And there's that striking.
Yeah.
So, like, I agree with this general point that Socrates is making here, but I kind of disagree with him about how it applies to his own situation, right? Like, I mean, if he is going to think the unexamined life is not worth living, that's already a little bit dubious. Like, I mean, like, I don't know, like, is the life of an animal not worth living or something like that, right? But then we're taking it a step further where like the people who are threatening him with execution, they're not actually commanding him to live an unexamined life. They're just commanding him to stop, practicing philosophy publicly. And it seems like, if he were to give that up, he could still do some kind of like hermetic philosophical life. It
almost starts to become implicated by a really, I think, distasteful argument that's sometimes made where it's like suicide is the most selfish thing you can ever do. That's a really, I don't think, a good take for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But the principle of that could actually be applied here. If you're being presented with a choice where it's like, do this and we'll kill you, and it's a really trivial choice, and you then do it anyways, I wonder, I mean, there's got to be some scenarios where we say that's wrong, depending upon your social dependencies. Like actually, I can already think of one. If you have very young children and you go mountain climbing, not like hiking, but like I'm talking like people who climb Everest, man, you're a kind of a piece of shit, is my opinion. I have a family member who used to be very into mountain climbing, like the kind where you know, you're backpacking and like it's the kind where you can die and stuff like this. Not that they're a badass or anything, but like the kind where these are the kind of stakes. And they would always talk to me about how they really really had a strong dislike for people who did that, who had like kids at home, because it's an incredibly reckless thing to do. It's an incredibly reckless thing to do that you're just doing because because it's fun, right? You have kids at home and you're doing this thing where you really could die, and you're not doing it for a really good cause. You're doing it for, you know, what is ultimately just a hobby, right? It's something that you really enjoy. You could just go normal hiking. There's plenty of outdoor activities. You could pick up reading. You could pick up knitting. You know, you could pick up wargaming. There's all sorts of things. And in that calculus, you're almost engaging in what is an unjustifiable level of risk, that you then could be leaving some kids, you know, home without, you know, a father or a mother. And this happened. There were specific, there was a specific story that they talked about of this person who I don't know if they personally knew them or if they just heard the story, but basically a single dad who left, you know, two, you know, children under 5 years old at home without any parents because he went to go mountain climbing and then died. And this family member that I had that was mountain climber themselves always talked about how they just thought that was such a piece of shit thing to do. And I wonder if you could then apply this to this. All right, Socrates, you're not allowed to teach your classes anymore. I would rather die. And like Socrates' family is sitting there to the side like, dude, what the fuck? Really? Like, that's how little, like, all of us are worth to you? Like, all the richness we bring to your lives and stuff? Like, goddamn.
This is reminding me a little bit of a conversation I had recently on Discord with somebody I know, Hi Mercury, if you ever listen to this. So this person is really into like game theory and like decision theory models, and they were recently espousing to me the virtue of the idea that if you never give in to threats, you never give someone any cause to threaten you, because it'll never get them what they want. But then now if I try to apply this to like Socrates' situation, like if you just you know, if somebody puts an extremely heavy threat on you and asks something of you that's really not that big a deal, like is it really worth it to like die just so as not to give up this small thing? But actually, like the example you gave, I think might even be even a better example, because you're giving up so little by just doing safe hikes instead of dangerous mountain climbing, right? And I think, I mean, I don't know that much about mountain climbing, but isn't the fatality rate pretty high for people that go to Everest and stuff? Or
For ones that, for the ones where you need like oxygen packs and shit like that, my understanding is it's very dangerous. Like there is a real like chance that the family member I knew almost died, and it's what made them stop doing it. Was the first time they went for one of the really like colossal mountains, they got lost in a snowstorm in like the final day. And they were like they got stuck in like a cave or something, or some overhang basically, where they were just trying to get out of the storm, and they were like rubbing each other's feet to make sure they didn't freeze up, because you know you can get like frostbite on your feet, and, like you and I, like toes snap off and stuff like that if it gets too bad. And the family member was talking with the people they were with, like, man, are we gonna die here? Is this how we die? And they didn't die, and they made it out. But after that, they were like, yeah, this is not for me. I'm just gonna go back to, you know, doing like the Appalachia Trail and stuff like this. They were good after that. But I believe, yeah, it's. I couldn't tell you what the rate is, but my understanding is like it's not uncommon.
Yeah, and what you give up is like you give up a little bit of the thrill and a little bit of the sense of accomplishment you get by doing the more dangerous thing, um, and what you get by giving that up is you get to like live the rest of your life with your family and care about your relationship and obligations to them, right? And I think like the I don't know to what degree this would apply to Socrates, because as far as I know, I don't think he was he like married or had kids. I'm not sure about that,
I
but
have no idea.
but he had students at least, right? He had people that cared about him, and
The wrong professor.
and he had stuff that he could do around the city, right? Like presumably he doesn't actually think that a life without professional public philosophy can't be worth living, right?
Yeah.
And whatever good he could have done, just simply being more private about it, or else publicly taking up a different profession, or both, he gives up all of that just to make a point and be a martyr. And yeah, this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about like, people just having this putting martyrs on a pedestal, or however you want to put that, right? It's like, it makes me think maybe his pride got the better of him, right? He's like, I want to think of myself as a person so virtuous that they'd give up their life for their ideals.
Yeah.
And that's really, that doesn't seem like a very moral choice at all when it's framed that way.
Yeah. I think you actually can get to arguments like that depending upon the context. Just looking up, I guess this is the oh, excuse me. Just Googling first. This is the first result, so a healthy pinch of salt.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks like the fatality rate of climbing Everest is 1.48%.
Okay, so not trivial, but you're probably gonna live.
Yeah, I mean, man, that is way higher than I would have thought it was going to be. I was thinking it was going to be sub 1%, because the fact that then people go and do that, oh, just a 1.5% chance I'll die, bro. You're a psychopathic person. You're a crazy person. Like, oh my God, Jesus Christ! Everyone always says, "Oh, we need to teach classes. We need to have a tax class." No, we need a fucking D&D class, because no one understands statistics.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
okay. I mean, I guess it probably should just be a statistics class then. In fact, I'm really, yeah, that is a thing people really say. But anyways, Jesus, 1.5%, and people are going up there. Jesus Christ, man.
Honestly, I thought it was going to be
crazy.
worse than what, but I don't know shit about mountain climbing, but I was expecting you to say like 5% or something. But
Yeah, well, my understanding is that, when it comes to like Everest and stuff, there are parts of the climb where it's like, all right, and if you look down, you can see all the bodies of people who tried who died here in the last 30 years, because they're all frozen, so they don't decompose. So, yep, right there, like 50 feet below us, there's a pile of a bunch of bodies, and they're like whatchamacallit, they're like special jackets and stuff. Anyways, moving on. Yeah.
they're basically like mummified up there, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's literally, hold on, I think it's called Rainbow Valley.
I guess there must not even be animals that live at that high of an elevation that would eat them or something.
Yeah, I think so. Let's see here. Globotrex.com. Well, that's not the most, that doesn't fill me with the most confidence. But here we go. Only the toughest adventurers, hikers, and climbers brave Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world, located in Nepal and Tibet. With a summit of over 26,000 feet, Everest is no joke, and Rainbow Valley is a testament to how challenging it is to take on this majestic mountain escapade. Thousands of climbers attempt to summit Everest every year. While some make it to the top, others give up and ascend the mountain. Sadly, some don't survive, many of whom end up in Rainbow Valley. Despite its whimsical name, Rainbow Valley is a positive spin on a rather grim area on the northeast slopes of Everest. Also called the Death Zone, Rainbow Valley is an area underneath Everest's northern ridge dotted with dead bodies. Unfortunately, people die on Mount Everest every year, and Rainbow Valley has become a graveyard to over 200 bodies today. Rainbow Valley, Mount Everest, gets its euphemistic name from the multicolored jackets of the casualties. Oh, Jesus Christ! Oh
Wow.
my God! Who lost their lives on the mountain. The colors of the rainbow, red, green, and blue, are present in the form of down suits peeking out from underneath the snow. Wow, that is so fucking evil. Jesus.
So
Many of the casualties will have fallen in the death zone. Alternatively, if they pass during the mountain trail, other climbers will have been forced to push their bodies off of the track and out of the way. Wow, imagine finding a dead person on Jesus. It's a grim story, but unfortunately, climbers on Everest aren't given much choice. With the trail dangerously narrow, icy, and slippery, every minute is a life or death decision. Climbers who discover dead bodies must put their own lives first and do the utmost to survive. With the effects of altitude sickness reaching severe levels in the death zone, climbers must also fight not to fall asleep and freeze to death in the cold.
So they said thousands of
In the
people.
death zone, climbers must also.
Oh, sorry, your audio cut out for a moment. I thought you were done.
No, yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so they said thousands of people attempt this every year. And so, like, I'm just imagining, like, suppose 2,000 people attempt this every year, 1.5% of them don't survive. We're talking about, like, 30 people dying every year, right? And it's like, okay, how many, like, families are left without a family member because people just went for that thrill and sense of accomplishment? It's like, is this really...
They'll never be able to prevent them from hiking either, so the only moral option is to nuke Everest. Deny them the opportunity.
Yeah, well, you know what? Maybe the elderly mom needs to go hike Everest.
Yeah, no. I was just about to say, right? Preventing the suicide of the elderly mother, but not putting her in the nursing home, or putting her in the nursing home and then preventing her suicide by taking away the knives. You know, we're going to take away the sharp objects that these people would hurt themselves with. You know, it's just like a padded cell. You know, we're just going to nuke Everest, take it out, easy peasy.
Yeah, well, nuke every mountain in the world that's similarly dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, there could only be a couple, you know, that are going to be this bad. You know, Everest, Kilimanjaro, I don't know, a couple other.
Yeah, and then we have to find the next most dangerous hobby that people take up that has a high fatality rate, and whatever it is, nuke it.
Yep, free climbers, no more cliffs, guys. Sorry, no more cliffs. We're gonna go through.
We're taking out Yosemite.
Yeah. No, it's like a Grand Canyon. You got to fill that up all the way.
Yeah. I mean, the whole world the whole world's gonna be a padded cell when we're done with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like Minecraft terraforming when you want to smooth out the hill. We're just gonna have to do that with every cliff in the world. Grand Canyon is actually a classic example of this, where or not I should say a classic example, but it's a great case study because that is a place that's full of all these warnings of being like, do not of warnings of like, do not go here, you will die, and shit like that. And I wonder actually. Because I've been to the Grand Canyon, and when I went there, I got a book that contained every recorded death in the Grand Canyon ever, put into a big book that you could read about. Funny anecdote, the reason the creation of the FAA in America, the Federal Aviation Administration, the people who track all the planes and shit, the government agency that does that, that was created in the aftermath of two big passenger jets colliding with each other over the Grand Canyon, as if it couldn't already get any worse. Yeah, hold on, let me just Google this real quick. But anyways, the point I was trying to get at is in the Grand Canyon, the thing they always tell you is it is way more dangerous than you think it is, because you don't realize how exhausted and how dehydrated you'll become very quickly, especially because the thing they always tell you is people will go down into the Grand Canyon, and it's easy to go down because you're going downhill, and they'll go way further than they can actually come back, and people then will get lost and will die. And this happens. There are signs that warn you, do not go past this point if you don't have water and stuff. I wonder if there's a park policy of like stopping people and be like, no, turn around. They're definitely not legally empowered to detain people to stop them from doing that. So I'm curious about that. If there's any sort of policy for that, that'd be an interesting thing to Google.
I was actually just recently reading about quicksand, and because it's a thing you see in movies sometimes, and I wasn't sure like is this to what it, is this a real thing? Is it actually like dangerous in real life? And it came up like yeah, in the Grand Canyon they actually have like quicksand pits. It's a real thing, and so it doesn't quite work the way they depict it in movies, but what happens is you don't sink all the way into it, but what happens is you sink like halfway in and then you get stuck and you can't move. And so that like one of this is one of the many death traps that along the line of what you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm. Oh, another great example: closing roads. I guess to be fair, closing roads, you're not just endangering yourself potentially, so there's a bit more leeway there. But yeah, anyways, but yeah, that's another example where we do say, nope, you're not even gonna have the option to put yourself in danger. It's not worth it, buddy. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. So, yeah. First off, yeah, 1956 Grand Canyon midair collision occurred in the Western United States on Saturday, June 30th, 1956, when the United States, the Douglas D-77 struck a Trans World Airlines Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation over Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona. All 128 aboard both planes perished, making it the first commercial airline incident to exceed 100 fatalities. The airplane had departed Los Angeles International Airport minutes apart for Chicago and Kansas City, respectively. The collision took place in uncontrolled airspace where it was the pilot's responsibility to maintain separation, see and be seen. Man, that's wild. Imagine it's like you got like 100 people on the plane. It's like, yep, just keep an eye out for any other planes. If you see them, just go a different direction.
Yeah, it's kind of
Holy shit.
astonishing that they would have commercial aircraft flying around without any kind of regulatory body. It just makes me think like well, what were they ever thinking that nah, we don't. We'll just deal with that when it comes up. Like,
yeah, they say it right here. This highlighted the antiquated state of air traffic control, which became the focus of major aviation reforms. It says here uncontrolled airspace, so I assume there probably would be some level of coordination for more busy airports. But what I'm betting is it was something like, yeah, airports and cities will do coordination, but if you're out over a field in Kansas, yeah, just keep an eye out. Just keep an eye out. What are the chances? Yeah, that's wild.
mm-hmm.
It's funny. I was actually just watching. There's this YouTube channel, 7-4 Gear. That's it's basically just like this sort of almost vlogging channel of this guy who flies 747s commercially, talking about like he'll react to viral videos of like planes and stuff and give a more detailed explanation. Just the sort of the airline version of one of the many channels that's like professional reacts and stuff. And I enjoy it. And he was talking about how they actually have dedicated lanes for crossing the Atlantic, for which lanes go what directions and stuff like that. Just a really cool tidbit about sort of how they will block out physical space for what's the best spot to fly.
Yeah, and it makes sense that you would have to do that as long as and it's a little bit shocking to me that it took them until the 1950s to even start that process. It sounds like.
Hmm.
Oh, we've drifted kind of far away from the Socrates.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find if there's anything about the Grand Canyon, the park rangers being able to stop you for your own safety, but I'm not seeing anything like it, which to me suggests that they can't, which would make sense. I mean, I'd be amazed. Yeah, I mean, legally it'd be, I'm sure, a nightmare where it's like, oh, park rangers are like, nope, you can't go. You're not well enough equipped for this.
Logistically, it would be a nightmare too. Like
you're never stopping these people. I mean, they're just gonna go. They're just gonna go someplace else that's even more dangerous, and you're just gonna do more harm than good.
Yeah. Besides which, you just can't possibly patrol the entire canyon, right? Like they can't keep an eye on it, on the whole area.
Yeah. That's wild. Anyways, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem.
Phrase again the idea of a life worth living. And what is Socrates saying here? He's saying, yes, maybe I could agree to stop philosophy and that would please the jury and that I would be allowed to continue living and have a larger quantity of life. But it wouldn't be worth it. Because to stop practicing philosophy would be to stop living an examined life. And by that, he just means a life where we think about our commitments, we think about what is just, we think about what is good, and we apply our critical faculties to the question of how we should live. And to Socrates, that just is what it means to practice philosophy. So for him to agree to what the jury is saying, for him to stop practicing philosophy in order to keep on living, would mean he would have to give up living an examined life. And for Socrates, that would mean to give up a life that is worthy of a human being. Human beings have these rational and critical faculties to think deeply about our lives, and if the only way I can continue to live is to give up those, then what would be the point? Again, another consideration which puts the quality of our life above the quantity. And finally, he makes a similar point when he
The other thing you have to be really careful is if you start to get to these calculations, it becomes really difficult to not end up in places that are really weird, where it's like, all right, everyone who donates to, it's like you're on the Titanic and it's like women and children first. No, wait. People who make charitable contributions first. Quickly, get out of here, you moral sons of bitches. God bless you for donating, stuff like that. Oh my god, it's funny. Literally yesterday, my friends, the group chat I have with my personal friends was absolutely destroyed by a debate over whether or not it's immoral to donate to animal charities. Instead of donating them to human charities. But anyways, that's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, man, when you start to make when you start to make really authoritative statements, and not like I would prefer to die rather than live an immoral life, but no, this life is not worth living if it's not moral. You can start to get to some really weird places where it's like, oh, you didn't reach your morality quotient, time to downgrade your human rights. And it becomes really difficult to avoid those conclusions, I think, which is, I think, a really key part of moral philosophy of owning the consequences of your positions, not just for the reasons we stated before, but it's the only way, I think, to make like sort of a coherent moral system. I feel like a lot of times you'll run into people in arguments where you'll say, well, but if we extend your logic, that would justify this. And they're like, yeah, but I'm not saying that. And it's like, okay, but we should probably have consistent systems, and you ought to be held responsible for the conclusions of your ideas, even if you don't endorse them. It's the thing I always use in debates, just because because of course I would, is if you say A equals B and B equals C, you've endorsed A equals C. Even if you never say it.
Yeah, I think we have to be really careful with those kind of debate moments, like you just mentioned, though, because if somebody endorses a particular idea, like here's the annoying version of it, right? It's like, so say I espouse some opinion to you, and then you infer from it that I must be I must have arrived at that opinion from some general principle, and you think you know what that general principle is, and then effectively you're saying, well, if we follow your logic, then this happens, but it's because it's because you have inferred that I'm arguing for this general principle, right?
Yeah, you have to have a really good articulation of like the law of like the link chain, because otherwise you'll get like screaming matches where it's like, I'm not saying that. Yes, you are. Like you need to say you need to take a deep breath and be like, if you believe this because of that, would it not also follow that this means, if you believe that A equals B and B equals C, would it not follow that A equals C? Phrasing like that can save you lifetimes of wasted screaming matches in debates. And it's so easy to misunderstand people, even when both people are trying their best to have good faith. That you really have to. You should just almost never say you are saying this, and always try to work within like the framework of like, well, wouldn't that mean, or if we ran this to its logical consequence, stuff like that.
I really like to try to establish the intermediate step and just try to ask them outright if they are endorsing that general principle, right? Because it's very likely that they came to that conclusion from some general principle, but it's but it's kind of, I don't want to like take the guessing game and think I know which principle that is that they're applying there, right? And so I don't want to go like, well, if I follow your logic, then that must mean this, right? Because then I'm like jumping a couple of steps away from what they're saying, and it just, in my experience, that kind of thing like derails arguments horribly, right? It's like, well, no, I'm not saying that. Why are you saying, and then you get into an argument about whether you're straw manning them, and I just don't want to deal with it, right? And I would rather just go like. When you have this opinion, is it because of of this general principle that I think you might be endorsing? And then if they say yes, then you can go to the other example and go, well, I think this principle is problematic because then your logic leads to this. But I don't want to jump straight from the first example to the second one without establishing that they really are connected by way of this person's thought process in the way that I
and one of the worst things can be sometimes it feels like a person doesn't even know why what the principle for why they believe in a thing. Which, to be fair, sometimes can be. I'm saying that in a way that seems very like dismissive or looking down on them. But sometimes, but I think it'd be very refreshing to argue where a person's like, I feel this way, but I'm not sure why. Let me try to reason that out. That could be a very positive and good thing. But then there's also the bad version where it's like, okay, but you said that you believe in this because of this. You say you believe in this principle or in this position because of you said that you believe in position A because of principle B, but principle B leads to position C. Well, I don't believe in position C. So then there must be something other than principle B, and sometimes those conversations are had not in a very good way, where it feels like the person isn't even seeking to establish the person doesn't even seem to want to engage with the reasons why we believe in the positions, just the positions themselves.
Well, and moreover, it can come across as like accusatory, right? It's like, oh, you believe in this thing? Well, then you must believe in this terrible other thing, and now I'm going to start moralizing against you on something that you never said. And it just makes the whole thing into like a really combative situation. And when people get into that mentality, they're much less likely to be willing to introspect and reconsider their opinion, right? It's like you've taken away their learning opportunity, even if there is something they could have learned from the conversation.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, that commenter is 100% right, Ivan Neo. Listen, it's fine to want to just rationalize your beliefs as long as you're like transparent about it. I mean, like if you say, man, I just like this and I want to have a reason for it, that's not a philosophically bankrupt position. But oh my God, when someone says, no, I have a reason for this. I don't just believe in things because they think that must be some evil, horrible crime. That's something that stupid people do. They're not stupid. So I have reasons. Well, what are those reasons? Well, let's not get into it. That is, oh my gosh, that is just like the worst thing.
So this commenter, by the way, followed us last week, and I went and checked out his show, and his show is really good. He talks like science and philosophy stuff, and I think like I really wish we had more of that kind of educational content on Twitch. Now here we are trying to do a little bit of like edutainment thing, but Flowtrace and we really are coming from the like politics debate sphere, and we're spinning off of that to do like some educational stuff about philosophy and politics, right? This guy Ivan Neo, his channel is more straightforwardly educational than ours even is, and I watched a couple of his VODs, and I want to recommend
philosophy. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I want to recommend anybody to go check him out. Like, and I believe he's coming from a physics background, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yep, his channel's description is, let's talk about philosophy and rationality. I will also do some science presentations. My background is in physics. That's awesome.
All right. So yeah, I want to say I don't know what his schedule is. Maybe like Tuesdays or something. Ivan, go ahead and say like in the chat if you want like what your schedule is, and people should
and you can give him a follow, and then you get alerted. Then you get alerted whenever he's live.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't. Like I don't think we're ever gonna like line up to where I'd rate into you.
He's got one scheduled Sunday the 19th. Science and philosophy talk, 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. PST. Streams every Sunday. Be there or be square, buckos.
All right.
Anyways.
When he says, you see, whether in trial or in a war, neither I nor anyone else should contrive to escape death at all costs. Escaping villainy is much more difficult. There just are certain things that are more important than dying. There's some things that are worth dying for. And if the only way, in Socrates' view, that he can continue to live is to sacrifice virtue, to sacrifice his commitment to philosophy, to sacrifice his commitment to an examined life, then in his view, such a life simply would not be worth living. Now, you might take issue with the fundamental importance that Socrates places on philosophy. You might think, well, maybe that's not really a value that all human beings need to value just in the way Socrates does. Maybe that's more personal to him. And that's a discussion you can have. But the broader point is this: if you think that there are some principles, some values, and commitments which make your life worth living into the future, if there is something your life is about, if your life has some sort of purpose, then you really need to think carefully about whether it would be worth it to extend your life in a way that would force you to undermine those commitments. And in fact, we see exactly that point in this case. Now, Mother is not a philosopher. She's not talking about the importance of living an
Or is
examined
she?
life oriented toward discussions about
Well,
virtue.
now she's
But
not
she
as worth a
certainly
saving.
has some commitments that she thinks make her life worth living,
She's going
and
last on
seem
the
to be
Titanic.
important enough
Yeah.
to her that she would be willing to end her
Women and
life
children in the front,
early
philosophers in the
if
back.
she could no longer have those things. And so here we should highlight the following part of the case once again. They started looking into appropriate nursing homes, but Mother, who was a school teacher and fiercely independent all her life, has put her foot down. No homes. Look, you know how valuable my mind and my dignity have been to me. I simply cannot.
Yeah, sorry, like that's a little revealing. Dignity, like, oh, you're like nursing homes are so below you, and you're gonna literally die rather than do that. Like that, that seems kind of dumb. That seems a little foolish, I think.
Well, maybe, but dignity is highly subjective, I think, isn't it?
I mean, it is, but like, I feel like that just, I don't know, the idea that like nursing homes are so undignified that you'd rather end your life early. Like, man, if I was in the position of, you know, one of the people that certifies, you know, doctor assisted suicide, make sure you're like of sound of mind. And I heard like, oh, well, I don't want to go to a nursing home because that's just below me. It's like, that would be a big red flag for me. I don't know, maybe like an actual, you know, person who does that would disagree. But man, I don't know. That's like, if it feels like you're telling me like, I can't believe they delayed Cyberpunk again. I can't take it. Like, it's like, I don't think this is a good reason to end your life.
Okay, well, let me frame it a different way. When she's talking about dignity, maybe she's not talking about the nursing home. Maybe she's talking about having to live with her own mental deterioration, like Alzheimer's or something like that, right? I can.
That would be better, but I think in that hypothetical, yes, but I think in this hypothetical, it's explicitly just the nursing home because they could provide her with the in-home nurses, I thought, and then she would be fine.
Did they say that, like, isn't that more or less? Wait, I'm trying to remember the way they presented that. It was like that's the alternative that's like less expensive than sending her to a nursing home, but she still gets the
It's more expensive, but then
Oh.
she won't die because she'll choose not to end her own life.
Okay, but well, didn't she say she wanted to end her own life when offered that same prospect?
No, I don't.
Or am I remembering this wrong?
My understanding was that the grandma can't be trusted to the steady state status quo. Squo was she's living home. Inherency, changing of the situation, she's getting her Alzheimer's is getting worse, right? The home's gonna burn down, I think was like the example they gave. So we've got two, okay, well, let's move her to the nursing home. No, I'd rather die. Well, we could give her in-home nurses, but that's gonna like financially ruin us.
Oh, okay, so she didn't say she'd rather die than have in-home nurses.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Which also, I think if you do some sort of, if you do like if you do moral philosophy's version of like fuck, I don't even know what's the term in math. You have of like simplifying an equation, of like working out a bunch of like the precursors to actually solving the equation, like 2x equals 2y. Well, that's just x equals y. Like boiling it down. What's that process?
Simplifying? Is that
Yeah,
what?
okay. I think it is just simplifying. I feel like if you simplify the moral dilemma here, Grandma is kind of like saying, "Give me nurses or I'll kill myself," which seems deeply immoral. Like this is, I feel like this is like the elderly person's version of like, oh man, I'm just so sad I don't have a date on Valentine's Day. Oh, that's crazy, man. Oh, I just wish someone would go out with me. Oh, I'm so lonely. I feel like I might kill myself if I don't get a girlfriend. Like this seems like a really weird guilt trip.
Oh, it's like the femcel grandma or something. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of feel like I would judge that very differently depending on whether the grandma's intentionally doing that, right? Like if she is purposely threatening suicide in order to get her own way, then I would view that really differently from if she is just asking for death, but but then would change her mind, but isn't like purposely using it as a threat. Like even though that's like de
it's definitely
facto the
not
same.
as yeah, it's definitely not as bad. But the question is like, is there really a difference there? Like, because like you could totally imagine, a hypothetical family. This hypothetical obviously could play out very differently depending upon what the family is, like
Yeah.
their history and how they work. But you could totally imagine a grandma who knows if I say that, they're gonna do whatever it takes. Like I'm not really presenting them with a choice. They would never, let me refer myself to a suicide program if there was an alternative. So I'm essentially forcing their hand. And man, I mean, I have not been in this situation because I am very young, but of going to a nursing home. But man, my initial thought as soon as I did this is, my initial thought as soon as I started thinking about this is, man, I would never want to put my friends or family in that situation where, okay, choose between me dying and paying for this very expensive thing. I would feel awful about that. Like, and I've never had anything to this level of like impact before, but I have had other scenarios where it's like, man, I know that if I was public about my options and the fact that I am, like, for whatever reason, not able to do one option, so I'm opting for the worst one, my friends would take it upon themselves to make that other option for me possible, whether it be, like, financial or scheduling wise. And I have then made the decision I'm not going to tell them because I don't want to put that burden on them. I'm going to, in this analogy, obviously not as extreme, I'm just going to refer myself to suicide, to the Hemlock Association, rather than burden them with that choice because I don't think it's fair or moral of me to put that on them.
This is a thing that comes up when people are talking, or thinking about their mental health problems, right? So for example, when people are experiencing depression, they might be reluctant to even share that with others for fear of putting that exact burden on them, and therefore they like wind up in this like self-destructive pattern of like hiding their own mental health problems and not seeking help because of it. And I think it's when you get into that state of mind, a lot of people who are depressed they do have like a very self-sabotaging or self-destructive mentality, and I think because of that I'm trying to think like how do I even explain what I'm trying to say about this, right? It's like if they do share like I'm depressed, I need help, and so on, that does kind of function as like the de facto threat that we were talking about earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet like if we're gonna say that that's no different from just threatening people to get what you want, then I feel like the implicit conclusion from oh no, I'm doing the debate tactic that we talked about earlier, but the implicit conclusion from that might be therefore don't share your mental health problems when you need help, and that seems completely untenable.
Yeah, I think it's really tough because like the question is like the question so like here's like a scenario where like maybe it does make sense. Let's say, you know that well, let's say you're incredibly depressed. And you know that if you share it with your friends, they're going to try to help you and it's going to do literally nothing. It's not going to work. In that case, I think it probably is moral to not share it with them. Right?
Can it? But a depressed person is pretty likely to think nothing is going to help.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem is I have to add a really big caveat. Guys, this isn't true in real life, okay? Please do not think, oh yeah, that is true of my... Because there's almost certainly at least one person who if they heard that would think, oh wow, just like me. No, not like you.
That's exactly
okay?
the way that depressed people think, right?
Yeah, exactly. But if it was literally the case, then yeah, maybe that is the moral decision. But man, it goes back to the exact thing we were talking about earlier. Even if you add the caveat, that's not how, that's not true of your situation. People are still going to take away that conclusion, at which point the effect of believing in that kind of calculus is itself a moral impact. So you almost want to you almost want to start lying. You almost want to start I don't want to maybe be a little too inflammatory here, but you almost want to do like a Vosh move of being like, I'm going to knowingly tell a lie because the impact of telling the truth is itself worse than the outcome of telling the lie. Yeah. Oh man.
But I think there legitimately can be situations where telling lies is better than telling the truth. Like, I think they're very few and far between.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure everyone's like, oh, lying to your kids about Santa is fine. Like that's good.
I'm actually not on board with that one. But effectively, like what I think is that there are times when you're trying to oppose something that you think is likely to happen from somebody finding out the truth. So I think this could, I mean, like, I can start with some trivial examples, right? Like an actor on stage playing a character, fine, nobody's going to think that's immoral.
Times of war, like...
I'm playing poker against you and I bluff you. This is not immoral, right? Like, but then also, we can get to the classic example that people always like to use is like Anne Frank is hiding in your attic, and then the SS comes knocking on your door, and it's probably more moral to tell them like, no, I haven't seen any Jews. Obviously that's better than telling them the truth, and it's also better than refusing to answer the question, right? And or like if we want to make it more contemporary, it could be like, well, there's a mass shooting in progress, and somebody asks you where are all, the shooter asks you where are all the people hiding. It's like, well, like you actually should just lie to them, right? Because if you even refuse to answer the question, it's like, I mean, the fact that you might waste their time and I don't know, probably maybe even put yourself at slightly lower risk.
It's funny because I think the defeater for the position of starting to lie is almost the reason. The defeater for it is how you get there. If you if you arrive to the conclusion, if you tell people to believe things, if you tell people to believe a thing that is true, they're going to do things with that are bad. So you shouldn't tell them to believe it, even though it's true. So you should lie about it.
Right. And so where I was going...
But now you're telling people that they should lie if they think that it's good, and the effect of that then on people's right in the same way people are going to take the original thing too far. You can't trust people to. It's like because really the conclusion is like, it is okay to lie, but only when it's the right circumstance. People aren't going to only do it in the right circumstances. They're doing all the wrong circumstances, right? And they're going to get to places, if it's appropriate to lie, then I also don't want people to know that I lie, so I should lie about lie. And it just becomes an internal dialogue. And the effect of all of this, by the way, is to then cut the legs out from under yourself, where you no longer even talk or argue or think about your position with anyone else, and you start to believe things that are wrong because you can't talk, because you never find out they're wrong, because you don't talk to people, because you can't have any open discussions, because that would reveal that you're lying, and you can't reveal that you're lying. So I think that's the ultimate defeater for it. I just think it's really funny how you sort of end up getting there by like applying the exact same logic through like 3 steps, and every time you apply it, the new state you get to, you apply that same logic and you get to a new place.
So like from a totally like idealized point of view, I agree with what you're saying. In point of fact, people just do lie, right? We can't actually have a society because if we look at what a bunch of the bad effects of lying are, like what you're getting at is like it undercuts everybody's trust in one another, right? Like just all of us by knowing that people lie are just a little more reluctant to believe everything we're told, and because we can't have that level of trust, there's a bunch of like bad following consequences from that, right? But actually, I think we just can't avoid that because because like we just are never going to have a society where people aren't lying, barring some bizarre unforeseen technological development that either stops us from lying or perfectly detects lies in a way that's not possible today.
You think just wait until we're gonna get the Kala in real life.
They get the what? What is that?
It's from StarCraft. It's like a hive mind, basically.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar, but so anyway, to take it back to the thing about depressed people, I think the advice I would want to give them is just don't purposely weaponize your depression against other people to try to like coerce them. But as long as you're not doing that, as long as you're not using it to hurt or coerce people, then I would say you should share it and just get help if you need to. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
People always think they're a burden when they're not. It's interesting to think about, well, what if you actually were a burden? But the reality is, like, you're not.
Well,
like,
and moreover, I think it's actually okay to be a little bit of a burden, right? Like, your life and the help that you need is worth it.
Yeah, and especially if you talk about not just being a burden, but to what degree am I uniquely a burden because I'm open up about my mental health? It's almost a nothing. Because let me tell you what, I've got plenty of friendships with people that aren't depressed or I'm not helping with their mental health, and it's still a fucking burden because we fucking fight all the time about some goddamn stupid shit. So like, yeah, the reality is that all relationships are to some degree a burden in the sense that they require work to maintain. But they're not a burden because we are okay with that. It's worth the trade. That's what a relationship is. It's tit for tat.
Yeah, and let me point out also, people actually like to help each other, and they derive some of their self-worth from the value that they can provide to other people. So if you actually need help with something and you give other people the opportunity to help you, you may be doing a mutually beneficial thing by being a burden.
Yep.
Endure the thought of ending my days tied in a chair drooling on my lap. Now, what is the overall point here? She's thinking about her entire life where she's been a fiercely independent person. She had purpose. She was able to do things on her own. She was able to go where she wanted to go. She was able to do the things that she found fulfilling and have her integrity intact, knowing that she had her personal autonomy. Now she's tragically staring in the face the possibility of a life where those things are gone.
So if Anne Frank is not in your attic, should you lie to the SS and tell them that she is to waste their time?
Where she no longer can live her fiercely independent lifestyle. And so we can see that just like Socrates, there is a quality of life consideration here that is really making her consider, would it be worth it for me to continue to extend my life, to continue to live on in the future? Or can I only live on in the future in a way I wouldn't recognize, in a life that would feel foreign or alien to me? Now, all of this brings up a very important further question. I think we can understand why Mother is reacting negatively to the idea of living in a home. She's reacting negatively to the thought of living a life that she doesn't recognize for herself, that seems very different from the life she used to live and the kind of life she would want to live. So all of that is understandable. At the same time, however, we might wonder, should we trust her self-assessment of how valuable her life would be in a home? When Mother says that her life would simply not be worth living if she had to live in a home, is that a judgment that we should trust, or is it one that we should push and maybe seek to override? There are a couple facts we need to keep in mind. Mother is in a very difficult situation. She's likely approaching the end of her life, likely under a lot of stress, and also, of course, is an Alzheimer's patient. And all of these factors should contribute to us asking the question, is she in the appropriate and competent mental state to actually judge the quality of her life? Is she so scared about losing a life she used to live that she can't see that although there will be aspects of her new life and new existence which won't be the most desirable, that there could be many positive elements as well that she's simply overlooking? And this provides a further complication here. She seems to suggest that her quality of life in a home would be so low that life would not be worth living, but we really do need to wonder, is she in an appropriate position to make that very serious and important judgment?
Perhaps not, but I don't know that anyone else is in a position to make that judgment either.
One thing that Noon emphasizes as being very important is that when we're facing an ethical dilemma, we need to define the dilemma we're facing very distinctly and clearly. And here's how she defines the dilemma in the Vlasovic's case. In the Vlasovic's case, the dilemma is painfully evident. How to ensure mothers and the family's welfare while respecting mothers' choices and the most serious rules of our society, while allocating the family's not abundant resources justly among the generations that will call upon them. I use this description because it brings out many of the further conflicts that we need to discuss. And as I've highlighted in red here, another further conflict between how do we ensure and promote welfare and how do we respect autonomy and individual choice. And let's look at this section of the case again. So they have this choice. Should they insist on the home or put mother there anyway after she's no longer organized enough to resist? Or should they devastate their own financial resources with hired nurses? And here we have a conflict, it seems, between, on the one hand, respect for autonomy, and the other, promotion of welfare. So, what do these two commitments mean? Well, respect for autonomy is essentially a moral duty by which we need to respect the choices of other people. We need to respect the free choices of individuals to live their lives according to their own desires, goals, values, and priorities. We think that people should be treated with the sort of special status they have as rational, independent decision makers. And because we have this ability for free choice, the idea is that it's at least initially morally wrong to override that free choice. We have to accept that people have different goals, different priorities, different values, and we show respect for that by allowing people to act on those priorities and make their own decisions. That's respect for autonomy. But this can often conflict with promotional welfare. The idea behind promotional welfare is very similar to the idea of utilitarianism that we discussed earlier. It's a moral duty to act in a way that serves the best interest of all parties involved. When you're concerned with promotional welfare, you are concerned with questions like how do I make the most amount of people happy? How do I serve the interests of the largest number of individuals? So all would agree that these two values, respect for autonomy and promotional welfare, are important. But in this case, they seem to conflict. Why is that? Well, on the one hand, we might say, well, we need to respect mother's autonomy. But of course, her free choice, the
This is
choice
D and
she has
D
made, the
alignment stuff.
decision she
Chaotic versus
wants,
lawful.
is a decision where she doesn't end up in a home. And if we do that, then of course the only other alternative that we're considering at this point would be to hire nurses to come and take care of her. And you might say, well, how does that conflict with promotion of welfare? Well, as Newton explains, the resources of the family are limited, they don't have a ton of money, and hiring the nurses would very much deplete their financial resources. And not only are they calling on those resources now, but as she explains, the Vlasovic's children may need those resources in the future. It seems if we take a broad overall perspective of accounting and trying to serve the interests of everyone involved, then doing that would require mothers staying in a home, which is more economical, and having those resources available for everyone else. But of course, the only way we can do that is by overriding mother's free choice, by failing to respect her autonomy, by saying, although you don't want to go in a home, it is necessary that you do this, perhaps against your own will in some sense, for the greater good of the whole. Now, here we see a clear case where it seems like we can only respect autonomy by not promoting overall welfare, and only promote overall welfare by not respecting autonomy. Something has to be sacrificed. It doesn't seem that we can have both. If one of our primary moral concerns is respecting mother's autonomy, then of course there's another option that she put on the table. She expressed the belief that a life in a home simply wouldn't be worth living. She's expressed the belief that she would prefer actually to die than go on living in a way where she'd have to sacrifice her independence. And so she tells the Vlasovics that if they simply cannot care for her any other way than a home, then she would prefer that they assist her in ending her life. And of course, she puts this in a rather sort of drastic, violent, and visceral way. Putting a pillow over her face is a dreadful thought, of course, but it is what Mother wants, or at least claims to want. And if they can't face the pillow, the Hemlock Society advertises many more humane ways to bring life to an end. And this statement brings up another potential conflict between competing moral values. On the one hand, again, we have respect for autonomy. To whatever degree we think that Mother is still capable of autonomous choice at this point, she has expressed the desire potentially to have her life ended. But that would seem to conflict with certain traditional, moral, and even legal prohibitions. In this case, potentially the traditional prohibition of homicide. And what is this? It is always morally wrong to kill another innocent human being. This is a
But how
bedrock
innocent is mom,
moral
really?
principle, not really just of our
Bro,
morals and ethics, but of our legal system
she's up
as
to
well.
something.
And it's seen as one of the most important ethical values and moral rules in society. So again, we seem to be locked in this conflict. To give Mother what she wants, to respect her autonomy by assisting her in ending her life early, it seems we also have to violate this traditional prohibition on homicide. Now, there are many complications here. Again, is Mother a competent decision maker? What do we mean by homicide? But let's put those aside for a moment. There are a few points to make. First, if we think about this case in particular, it's very unlikely that the choice to deliberately end Mother's life would be appropriate. And in part, that is simply because Mother is not in a position where she can truly consent to such a drastic choice. Again, she's an Alzheimer's patient. She is facing serious and drastic changes in her life circumstances. Not all her mental faculties seem to be intact at this point. So to acquiesce in that request would seemingly not be permissible even by those who most ardently support the right to choose how and when we will die. However, putting that aside, we should notice that aside from this case in particular, this is a more general ethical, moral, and legal problem. There are individuals who are competent decision makers, who look at their life prospects, who don't see a life worth living, and have made a rational judgment that they would prefer to not continue living on. However, they don't have the means to end their life themselves. And so sometimes they will request the help of a medical professional or someone they know. They'll request help in having their life ended. So I can't get into all the particularities of that conflict here, but we should simply notice that this is a real moral and ethical conflict, and it is a situation in which we can't do everything we want to do. We want to respect the autonomy of the patient. We also want to uphold the traditional prohibition on homicide. And it's difficult to see how those two things can be squared in all cases of this sort. The final ethical conflict that I want to consider in this case is a conflict between two different types of familial duties. That is, two different types of duties that we have toward family members. And that is specifically the duties we have to our parents and then the duties that we have to our children. So let's say a few things about each one of these first. First, the duty we have to our parents. This is a moral duty to support one's parents that can generally be classified as a type of loyalty motivated by gratitude. Right, so why loyalty? Well, you don't choose your parents, you are born to them, right? It's not a matter of choice, it's not a matter of your own free will. You're thrown into this world with a set of two individuals who are your biological parents. And that's not up to you. But presuming that they were there for you throughout your life, that they supported you, that they raised you, that they gave you what you needed to get to where you are today, at some point the tables turn. And the gratitude that you have for everything your parents have done for you when you were vulnerable, when you needed, when you were a child and couldn't make your own decisions and couldn't support yourself, those tables are turned
Can we
when your
pause for a
parents are
second?
older.
Mhm.
And
It sounds, if I take this argument at face value, then it would seem that your duties to the mom would be different depending on how well she treated you when she like if she was an abusive mom when you were growing up or didn't take good care of you or whatever. Like this argument would suggest therefore you no longer have this reason to repay your gratitude. But it seems like super weird to me to think like therefore your moral obligation to to this person's desire to die or not live in a nursing home should be any different because of that.
Yeah, I think there's also I think a bit of a there's a bit of a there's a lack of really going into, I feel like, the depths of these questions, because like the question of whether or not the faculties are sufficiently compromised is one that kind of gets glossed over, and I feel like the same is sort of being done here in regards to the nature of the relationship of a parent to a child, because in a lot of ways there's a bunch more stuff we don't choose. And on the one hand, I understand why he doesn't go into all of these, because we really don't have time for that. But I also kind of wonder, I mean, like, what if you're just going to say, well, there are questions about this kind of stuff and move on? I almost wonder what's the point.
Well, perhaps that's true that the lecture by itself it may not be getting into that stuff, but we can get into that stuff, right? we could use the lecture
Yeah.
as a kind of launching point for that same discussion. Um, to the point about the mom's faculties, like if that's what you're getting at, like how far is she into her mental decline? I kind of took the premise to be that her faculties are just gradually declining from here on out, and however bad you need them to be, she'll eventually get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that the mental decline is very relevant to the question. Of her ability to make the decision, because I don't really think it's a decision. It feels like you get to a weird point. I think you should be able to make some evaluation of the decision independent of whether or not they are mentally stable or not, because it would feel kind of weird that you could be like, oh, this is a correct decision, but you're making it for the wrong reasons. Like you could be mentally stable and make this decision, but because you're not, we're going to assume that it's a bad one.
There's this weird, almost like paradoxical thing going on here, right? Where if we accept her mental decline as a valid reason for her to want to die, then but yet we also think that her ability to make that decision is compromised by that same mental decline, then it's like the farther we go into her decline, it's like now she has better and better reason to want to die, but we trust her judgment about that reason less and less. And I don't even know like what it like how do we resolve that?
That's a great question, and I don't know.
I don't know either. Well, here we are posing questions and then not answering them.
Well, well, shit. Fucking
Well, so,
philosophers.
geez, like I totally thought we were gonna solve ethics today, and it looks like maybe we're not gonna make it. But
Yeah, wrap it up before the end of the week.
now, of course, it is on you as the child to support your parents out of a sense of loyalty and gratitude for the things that they have done for you. So, this is the basis between the common idea that there is a duty to support our parents. At the same time, there is also, of course, a duty to support our children. It's a moral duty to support our children that can be classified as a duty of care, uniquely taken on by parents that is motivated by love. The basis of a duty to our children is found in the fact that no one else can serve the sort of purpose that a parent does in a child's life. Whether biological or adoptive, whoever primarily is responsible for raising that child, giving the child what it needs, making decisions for the child, takes on a unique role in that individual's life. And not only do we think that there should be someone with that unique role in the child's life, who is responsible for caring for that child, We think it should be motivated by love, out of a concern for what's best for the child, out of a desire to see the child flourish. So, this is the basis of these two different familial duties, two different kinds of duties we have to family members. How exactly do these conflict? Well, once again, we can see how the duty to a parent comes into play here. We might say, well, it's rather harsh to put mother in a home when that's really not where she wants to go. Given all the things that she did for the Vlasivics when they were growing up, given everything that she did for her children, we might say it would be cruel, harsh, or maybe even disloyal, or maybe lacking in gratitude to now turn their backs on her and to say, well, even though we know that putting you in a home will radically alter your independence, radically alter your self conception, that we're going to give you off to someone else to take care of you. A person could argue that that is to violate the duty to one's parents. But of course, as we've explained, the only way that the parent, mother in this case, can be cared for is by taking on a significant financial burden with having nurses come to the home. And this might infringe upon the duty to one's children. We already said those financial resources may be needed so the children can go to college, so that they can have a good start in life, and so the children can flourish. And this is, of course, something that any parent is concerned about, and that we think parents have a responsibility to be concerned about. So, once again, we have a very difficult conflict of ethical duties or ethical values. We all think it's important to support parents. We all think it's important that parents support their children. Yet, in this case, it simply doesn't seem that we can do both. It seems that no matter what we choose, something has to be sacrificed.
It makes sense that that should be the case, since if you it's since it's basically like, here's a bad situation and here are like four different ways to cope with it, then obviously you're gonna have to sacrifice something.
The way I would like to end this video could be in a way that some would find anticlimactic. I've laid out all these different ethical conflicts in the Vlasivic case. I've
God
suggested
damn it.
how there are
He's
fundamental
gonna do
moral
it.
values at stake, and no matter what choice we make, while
He's
we
gonna give us all the
sacrifice
answers.
He's gonna gods and
and
generals
what
us.
you might want now is for me to come out and tell you, well, here is the right answer. Here's the way that you make a choice in the decision that preserves all the important moral values that we want. But of course, I don't have that for you. And in fact, I think that's largely because I don't think that's possible. One of the main things I hope you've gotten from this discussion is not necessarily what the right thing to do is in this case, but a recognition or a realization of the fact that moral life and ethical life can be difficult and messy. There's often not a clear right answer, there's often not a clear choice of what should be done. And because that is the case, there's a further point that needs to be made. Because there are competing ethical values, because people will prioritize those values differently, people will respond to the same scenario in very different ways. Some people will think respecting autonomy is more important than welfare in this case. Some will think the opposite. Some will think that life itself is valuable and as much quantity of life as we can get should be preserved. Others will think that quality of life is really what matters. People who are intelligent, who are reasonable, who are informed about ethics and all the facts of the case can look at the same situation and come to different conclusions about how to resolve all the conflicts that I presented in this video. So, what does that mean for us? What does that mean fundamentally for how we should respond to someone who looks at this case and comes to a different conclusion? I would suggest it means we should respond in the following way. We shouldn't necessarily give up on the idea that there is a right answer or a family of right things to do. We shouldn't give up on the idea that there are better and worse choices just because people see things differently. But once you understand how difficult the choice is in these kinds of cases, once you understand how deep the conflicts go in an ethical dilemma, I think one thing it can give you is a sense of humility and understanding. Instead of blaming those who disagree with you, instead of finding those who come to a different outcome as being fundamentally wrong-headed, even evil, or morally deficient. What you should conclude is this is a very difficult situation. I can see how there are fundamental moral values that others might prioritize over the ones I prioritize, and I can completely understand how someone could come to a different conclusion. And I think if you take away nothing else from this discussion, that might be the most important point. Because there's a tendency in ethical discussions to think that whatever answer I've arrived at, whatever values I place as the highest, must in fact be the only conclusion a reasonable person can draw. But of course, that just is a recipe for conflict. It's a recipe for misunderstanding. It's a recipe for distrust of our fellow human beings. Because if we don't think it's reasonable to come to an opposite conclusion, then we can only conclude that there must be something fundamentally wrong with how the other person's looking at this scenario. But if you accept that these decisions are difficult, if you accept that some sacrifice has to be made, and if you accept that some people might elect to make a different sacrifice of moral values than you might elect to make, then I think overall that can bring us to a better level of understanding and a better place of seeing the common humanity in those who disagree with them.
All right, I think that's the end of this one, right?
I think so, yep.
I agree with most of the stuff the narrator was saying there. I think that there literally is no objectively right answer to these kind of moral dilemmas. I think an answer can be right with respect to a particular set of values, but there's no right set of values to have by which to judge them. And then one other thing I want to say was about the reasonable person standard that he was kind of invoking at the end there. I know he didn't really take a firm stance on it, but this is a thing I have a lot of trouble with when they bring it up in legal scenarios, right? There's I'm having trouble remembering off the top of my head like exactly how it's used, but you know, like when I think juries are told to consider a lot of times evidence in court and to think like what would a reasonable person believe about this, right? But the thing is, I think humans are not inherently reasonable, and I think people, well, all of us are sometimes unreasonable, and when we're being unreasonable, we are in no condition to judge. You know, it doesn't feel any different to be unreasonable than it does to be reasonable. Like we're not competent to judge that distinction in ourselves, and therefore, like I don't think it makes a lot of sense to ever think like I must be reasonable or my point of view must be the one that reasonable people are compelled to have. And yeah. I wish people would just like have a little more epistemic humility about almost everything they believe. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. The process is just as important as the conclusion, even more so in philosophy than anything else, because the process itself can be a good or a bad, as we've discussed many, many times.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't really have anything else I want to add. Do you got anything else you want to add on this? Or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So do you want to shout yourself out? Or?
Yeah. Twitch.tv/Flowtrace, Twitter.com/Flowtrace, becoming more active, copium, and still working on my setup.
Okay. I'm gonna raid in just a little bit, and I'm gonna send you all over to Beckett. And see you next week.